I was told at that point I was in stage 5 renal failure, and that my kidneys were functioning, I think at that time, at about 12%. They looked back in the March, they'd been at about 18%, and nobody had got back to me. So I crash landed into kidney disease in November 2019.
Crash landed into kidney disease. This is how Carla describes the moment her world changed, the moment she discovered she was already in stage 5 kidney failure, sitting in front of a consultant, finding out her kidneys were functioning at just 12%. No one had warned her, no one had called. And in today's episode, Carla shares what happened next. This is Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast.
Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast in partnership with Kidney Care UK, sharing faith, knowledge, hope, and love.
Hi and welcome to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. I'm your host, Dee Moore. My guest today is Carla, a kidney warrior and former mental health nurse. In part 1 of this 2-part conversation, Carla takes us back to where it all began, to 2019 and to the moment her life changed completely. What started as declining kidney function became the shock of discovering she was already in stage 5 kidney failure. And from there came dialysis, setbacks, and some of the hardest moments of her journey. And I want you to stay right to the very end of this episode, because where we leave Carla's story today is a moment so many of us in the kidney community will recognise. Here's Carla's story. Before we begin, just a quick reminder. The experiences and information shared in this episode reflect Carla's personal journey and lived experience and are not intended to replace professional medical advice. Always speak with your own healthcare team about your individual care and treatment. Now, let's go. Hi, and welcome to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. How are you doing today, Carla?
I'm doing good, thank you, Dee. Yeah, I'm pleased to be here. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining me. Everyone knows what I'm going to say. I say it every time, but I love recording Kidney Warrior story interviews. Why? Because talking to somebody who's been there, done that, worn the t-shirt, it's so powerful to learn from someone's lived experience with CKD. So thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm going to start with my first question. And my first question is, how did your kidney warrior journey begin and how were you diagnosed?
Well, it began, I would say, back in 2019. I was feeling like really fatigued, really tired, but I was working full time. I was a mental health nurse, so you're busy. I had 2 young children at the time. So I went to the GP around March, and I said all of those symptoms. I'd also developed a real intolerance for alcohol. When I say intolerance, I mean I couldn't even have like one drink as a social occasion without feeling or even being sick the following day. So I went to the GP. They did some bloods. They told me that I was just busy. That was it. So they took some bloods just to check and said they'd get back to me if there was anything of concern. I didn't hear back from them. I didn't chase them up. But equally, nobody got in touch with me. So I left it. Back then in the October of 2019, things were getting worse. I was feeling more fatigued. I went to visit my sister and she prompted me to go back to the GP. So I went back to the GPs and had more bloods taken. And then I'd had a phone call the following day saying that I should go to Morriston Hospital. They'd arranged an appointment with me with a consultant in the renal department. I knew that was kidneys, but I didn't know much more about it really. So I went to that appointment and I was told that I had chronic kidney disease. I was told at that point I was in stage 5 renal failure, and that my kidneys were functioning, I think at that time, at about 18%. About 12%. They looked back in the March, they'd been at about 18%. And nobody had got back to me. So that's how they knew it was a chronic issue and not an acute kidney problem. So I crash landed into kidney disease in November 2019.
Wow. I mean, to find out at such a late stage, and then to find out that actually in March they already knew that there was a problem. I mean, how did that feel, being told so late and having to come to terms with all of this?
As you can imagine, it was a huge shock. I knew I'd been tired. I knew something wasn't right, and you know in yourself when something's not right. But when you've been and had a check and you think, okay, nobody's got back to me, you just assume that it can't be that serious, that things can't be that much of a problem. And so to find out then, sitting in front of a consultant, to be honest, I think I went into kind of an autopilot. And having been a nurse for so many years, I think my brain almost flipped it to, this is a patient's story. This is kind of somebody else's story. And that's how I could deal with it emotionally, if you like. So I kind of looked at it as, okay, so this person, me, has got this going on. What now? What do we have to do? Obviously, since I'm really disappointed in the GPs, and I feel like that system needs to change. I think there needs to be more awareness out there of kidney disease. But at the time, you just have to take it in your stride. And I didn't really have the time or energy to do anything about that. So yeah, it was a big shock. It was a big shock for me, big shock for the family. But really you just have to keep going forwards.
So you got your diagnosis when you were at 12%, which is considered to be stage 5 in kidney failure. Was there an immediate plan to start dialysis, or did they feel that there was a bit more time? Like, what was the immediate plan?
Yeah, so the consultant sat down with me at that first appointment, and when they broke that news to me that I was in end stage renal failure, she explained that I would need to have dialysis soon, and that I needed to have a think about that. That she would put in place some nurses and people to come and see me around what my options were, but also that she'd like to get me on the transplant list as soon as possible, and to think about all those kind of options. So I got bombarded with a lot of information. And obviously from that point in that kind of November time when I received that diagnosis, I then had a biopsy in the December, a kidney biopsy in the December. I mean, that in itself was the start of multiple hospital admissions, because I ended up having a bleed following that kidney biopsy. So I had to stay in overnight. And I think between the January and an April time, it was a real blur. And of course, when I'm saying this happened in like November, December 2019, we all remember what happened in March 2020. So as I'm going through all of that diagnosis and working out what the plan was, COVID hit. So I was now back and forth to the hospital regarding my renal appointments amongst COVID. And they discovered from the biopsy that they'd taken that there was possibly a cause that was related to my hematology side of things. So that had to go off for testing and go to various consultants. It ended up with a consultant in Oxford, I believe, but they came back and diagnosed me with a condition called MGRS myeloma, which is related to the blood cancer, multiple myeloma, but specifically had affected my kidneys. And that was what they felt had caused the kidney disease. But because of that, I was going to need to be under the hematology department at the same time as the renal department. So the plan was I was going to need to have chemotherapy and dialysis. So I was put on like a dual pathway of looking at chemo and looking at what my options would be for dialysis. Yeah.
That is a lot to take in and come to terms with, especially I would imagine everything seemed to be moving so fast at that time and making all those different decisions. In terms of modality of dialysis, was given that you would have to have chemotherapy and dialysis at the same time, did that limit the choices that you had to choose whether you would do peritoneal or hemodialysis, or did it not make a difference?
I think it had an impact, but I think a lot of patients choose their dialysis depending on personal circumstances. For me, I knew that I wanted to have hemodialysis because I've always had irritable bowel, and for me, then peritoneal dialysis was going to be a really difficult option with bloating and constipation and other things, which peritoneal dialysis doesn't really marry very well with. I also knew that because of some of the chemo drugs that I was going to be on, that might have an impact on that as well. And infection control wise, while you're on chemotherapy, you need to be really careful. So it was actually probably more favourable for me to go for hemodialysis so I could be in the hospital. As soon as I started on the chemotherapy drugs, which was, I think, in the July of 2020, my EGFR started to drop quite dramatically. So I went from 12% to 9% to 6% quite quickly, because obviously those drugs are quite nephrotoxic. So I think they then had to put in that plan for dialysis as quickly as possible. And there was talk of emergency chest lines, fistulas, and what was going to come first. But I managed to hang on, and I had a fistula surgery in the July. However, that surgery failed. But it was a process that for me was really difficult because you have to carefully consider what dialysis you want, as you rightly said. And when I decided to have hemodialysis, I was aware of that surgery. I was aware of what it would do. I was aware of the kind of misshapen arms that people can end up with. But for me, that was more favourable than the peritoneal and the stomach tubes, especially seeing as bathing is one of my coping strategies. And I thought, I can't not have a bath. I won't cope. So yeah, I had the fistula surgery on the 23rd of July. So after the fistula surgery, I was waiting for the healing process, waiting to see if that had worked, hopeful. It took a few days, but I couldn't feel that buzz or that thrill that they asked me to listen out for and look out for. So I went back to the vascular nurses. I believe the first time I had a scan and they thought it was working, just to have a bit of patience. Again, a few days later, I went back, I had a further scan, and they confirmed that unfortunately it wasn't working and my fistula had failed.
Having gone through the experience myself of having a fistula formed and then finding out that it failed, it never worked. I mean, what was going through your mind at that time? I mean, you were dealing with so much, and then now there's another obstacle to overcome. So what was going through your mind at that time?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think my overwhelming memories are that it was relentless. That's how I describe kidney disease, actually, and the journey. It is a relentless journey. And you think you're getting somewhere, and then something knocks you back. You think you're getting something, and somebody, it knocks you back again and again. And that was another huge setback. And you've just got your head around the fact that you're going to have dialysis. You've then just got your head around the fact that you're going to have surgery for that, and that, you're going to have a disfigured arm or whatever it is, which sounds vain, but they are considerations that you have to think about. And, as people, we do. And so you've psyched yourself up for all of that. You've prepared yourself for all of that. As you said, you've gone through the surgery. I can't think of an appropriate word, because disappointment just doesn't really sum it up, does it? It's sort of another devastation, and you suffer devastation after devastation, really. So yeah, I was devastated, I suppose.
I mean, we say things like it sounds vain, but ultimately, I feel like you go through so many changes in your life as a kidney patient, and then when your body, is scarred and changed by all these different surgeries, I really don't think it's a vain thing at all. I mean, it's a part of your body that changes in a way that it shouldn't really. We shouldn't be in this position, but we are. So I really don't think it's a vain thing. And I really understand, I really do empathize with that feeling of the loss of how your body was before. So with the fistula failing, was the plan then to have a chest line, or what was what was the plan then to be able to get the access for you to start dialysis?
I wanted to avoid a chest line, and they wanted to avoid it for as long as possible because of the risk of infection, because of the chemotherapy and my lowered immune system at that time. Um, as I said before, one of my coping strategies was to have a bath, and I really enjoyed that side of things as well. So we were trying to avoid that, although after surgeries you can't anyway. So they decided to go for an AV graft because I had no other suitable locations when they scanned my veins. My veins weren't particularly good. So they talked me through an AV graft, and I ended up having one of those fitted in the same location as where the fistula had been. So it was another surgery for that process to go ahead.
So when you had the surgery to fit the graft, could you feel the difference straight away in terms of the buzz or, the blood flowing in your arm?
With a graft, you don't feel the buzz in the same way because it's like I describe it as a bit like having a hose pipe underneath the skin there. So they connect one end of it to an artery, the other to a vein. It's a self-healing membrane that's like a tube that goes round in a loop. So you can needle into it, and because it's self-healing, it'll close. But because it's got quite a tough layer, I can feel it under the skin. You can see it under my skin on my arm, but you can't feel the blood growth through it.
So crash landing into CKD, having fistula surgery, which failed, and then having to have another surgery to fit the graft. Were you given any offer of support for mental health in any way at all?
No. I think I had to reach out for that support, and the only support I received was via, because I'd had the diagnosis of the MGRS myeloma, I found out that I was entitled to support from Maggie's, the charity Maggie's. So I picked up with them, and I had a counsellor from Maggie's to help me through a lot of those bits and pieces, and they were incredible. But I was never offered, at this point, I was never offered any psychological support from the health service, from the renal department. And as I said, the support from Maggie's that I went and got was something I sought myself.
It's really sad to hear that after going through so much in such a short space of time, that there wasn't that automatic offer of psychological support, and really goes to show, why we talk about this so much, to raise awareness that really that support should be there straight away for all patients. Really, we go through so much as kidney patients, and to not have that support really is really, really bad. And I really hope that the more we talk about this, the more we raise awareness of this, that this will change.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Certain staff members were absolutely fantastic and really supportive, really kind, really understanding. But I found that many of them are just so busy, so rushed. And we're one patient amongst many. So they don't necessarily have the time to sit with you and go through that psychological support that you need. And it really ought to come from a specialist, somebody who really understands. Later in my story, I did have some further psychological support, but at this point, it was severely lacking.
So you went on to start hemodialysis. How was navigating hemodialysis, managing your graft, needling, things like that? How was it for you?
I would say initially it was extremely overwhelming. I remember the first day walking in. I remember my husband dropping me off and walking in there and being completely overwhelmed. I'd never seen such large needles before. I didn't know what to expect, really, even though I had been sort of talked through it. But it's very different when you're facing it as a reality, and as a reality that it will be part of your life 3 times a week for 4 hours minimum each time. The graft being slightly more unusual than a fistula. some of the nurses or healthcare support workers who are trained in needling were a little bit more cautious, perhaps, to come and needle me because many of them didn't have much experience. So I often waited quite long periods for staff to be able to come and needle me. And I think at that point, that helped me make the decision that I'd like to do hybrid care. And having been a nurse before, I could kind of watch it and feel I could do this myself. I could do this well. So I went on to do a hybrid kind of care where I was in the hospital on the machines, but I was able to needle myself. And once I moved to doing that, I felt like I had a lot more control. However, I had many problems with my access point. And I think, again, access is one of those issues that doesn't get talked about enough. It causes many problems, not just the surgery initially. People's fistulas grow really large and can be, a bit of a worry for people. And then my AV graft, the problem with that was clotting. And unfortunately, it clotted a total of 3 times over the course of 1 year. And that was always really difficult because maybe I'd think, I haven't needled quite properly. I haven't got the right spot. So I'd have to call staff over. And often at that point, they would try and they would say, and then they'd get the vascular nurses to come down, be waiting around. And I kind of knew that there was a problem. And the vascular nurses would come with the scanner and they would then have to tell me that it was clotted. And at that point, I would need to have an emergency admission into the ward. And they would have to use a medication called alteplase, which is like a thrombolysis, a blood thinner, to essentially get rid of that clot. But it would be a 12-hour, you'd be admitted for that time, and the medication's kind of put in place with needles for 12 hours. So you had to keep your arms straight, the needles in for 12 hours. So that was difficult.
What Carla has just described, being told for the 3rd time that the graft hadn't worked, sitting in that hospital, not knowing if she had any fight left, that is a place so many kidney patients will recognize. That point where physically, emotionally, mentally, you feel completely drained. And yet Carla's story does not end there, because in part 2, we continue her journey through what came next and the road that eventually led to transplant. And the good news is you don't have to wait. Part 2 is available right now and is linked here for you. Go watch part 2 now, because Carla's story is far from over.
Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast in partnership with Kidney Care UK, sharing faith, knowledge, hope, and love.